Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 24th of September, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me live by live link today, we have the UK Column's Charles Malet and journalist and peace campaigner Vanessa Beeley. Welcome to the programme, both. Now, later in the programme, Vanessa's going to have the latest from Lebanon. I'm going to be covering the recognition of Palestine by the United Kingdom and others. And Charles is going to be reporting on connections between the migrant issue in the UK and digital ID. But we're sadly going to have to begin with the United Nations General Assembly, because yesterday Donald Trump spoke at the UNGA. It was mostly pretty obscene, actually. He began by blowing his own trumpet, if you know what I mean. And he was basically telling us all what a wonderful person he is. He stopped 7 wars, and personally he stopped them. He deserves a Nobel Peace Prize, but that's not why he's doing it. He's stopping all the wars to save lives, except in Gaza, of course. He heavily criticized the United Nations, and we can discuss this later, but perhaps with some justification. But he didn't mention systematic breaches of international law by the US, the UK, the EU, and Israel over the years. He was, however, very upset that the United Nations didn't give him $500 million to rebuild the UN building a number of years ago. That was very upsetting to him. He would have provided marble floors for that money. Instead, they spent billions and only got terrazzo. So there you go. The speech lasted 57 minutes. It could have been delivered in 5 to 7 minutes instead, because he was constantly repeating himself. Migration and net zero policy was the crux of it. Now, in fairness to him, he did make a couple of valid points, and the net zero point, I think Charles will be covering in a minute, was pretty much on the money as far as I was concerned, at least. But there was also this on Ukraine, and specifically on the EU, which I think is going to be an interesting. It's an interesting comment that he makes here. Let's have a listen to this.
This war would never have started if I were president. This was a war that should have never happened. It shows you what leadership is, what bad leadership can do to a country. Look what happened to the United States, and look where we are right now in just a short period of time. The only question now is how many more lives will be needlessly lost on both sides. China and India are the primary funders of the ongoing war by continuing to purchase Russian oil. But inexcusably, even NATO countries have not cut off much Russian energy and Russian energy products, which, as you know, I found out about 2 weeks ago, and I wasn't happy. Think of it. They're funding the war against themselves. Who the hell ever heard of that one? In the event that Russia is not ready to make a deal to end the war, then the United States is fully prepared to impose a very strong round of powerful tariffs, which would stop the bloodshed, I believe, very quickly. But for those tariffs to be effective, European nations, all of you are gathered here right now, would have to join us in adopting the exact same measures. I mean, you're much closer to this. We have an ocean in between. You're right there. And Europe has to step it up. They can't be doing what they're doing. They're buying oil and gas from Russia while they're fighting Russia. It's embarrassing to them, and it was very embarrassing to them when I found out about it, I can tell you that. But they have to immediately cease all energy purchases from Russia. Otherwise, we're all wasting a lot of time.
So, Vanessa, maybe I could get a comment from you on that. What did you think of that particular comment from him?
I can't. I mean, I don't know. I'm just speechless. You were better than me in the fact that you sat through the entire speech. But I mean, he's just borderline insane. I don't know. I honestly don't know what to say other than life has just become a theatre of the ridiculous, as far as I'm concerned.
Is that would you agree with that, Charles?
Good afternoon, Mike and Vanessa, and good afternoon all. To a point, although what I would say, and this is not necessarily to slap him on the back, but it is to acknowledge that he is an absolute master at scoring points where they are readily there to be taken. And I think that's really what he demonstrates. Okay, as you say, he certainly took his time to do it, an awful lot of repetition and congratulating himself for stuff that he probably hasn't achieved and won't achieve, but never let that get in the way of a good story. So I think insofar as he fires the popular imagination, this in some ways is a masterstroke, because he has so many of these sorts of catchphrases that can be pulled out and shoved around the world on the internet, social media, and all the rest of it for time immemorial.
Yeah, well, absolutely. But what was he talking about? He was talking about energy and net zero policy.
He was, and in a way, this was a revisit of what he was bashing Keir Starmer over the head with on his previous visit. So not the state visit, but when he was in the UK in the summer, he had a very awkward press conference with Keir Starmer up in Scotland, in fact, on one of his own golf courses. And one of the things that he likes to talk about, and again, going back to your point of finding it hard to disagree with this sort of thing, he puts out just enough truth to engage a certain percentage of the population, but also to set absolutely an equal and opposite force against him. But we'll just listen to what he had to say specifically on the idea of renewable.
We're getting rid of the falsely named renewables. By the way, they're a joke. They don't work. They're too expensive. They're not strong enough to fire up the plants that you need to make your country great. The wind doesn't blow. Those big windmills are so pathetic and so bad, so expensive to operate. Then they have to be rebuilt all the time, and they start to rust and rot. Most expensive energy ever conceived, and it's actually energy. You're supposed to make money with energy, not lose money. You lose money, the governments have to subsidize. You can't put them out without massive subsidies. And most of them are built in China, and I give China a lot of credit. They build them, but they have very few wind farms. So why is it that they build them and they send them all over the world, but they barely use them? You know what they use? Coal. They use gas. They use almost anything, but they don't like wind. But they sure as hell like selling the windmills. Europe, on the other hand, has a long way to go, with many countries being on the brink of destruction because of the green energy agenda. And I give.
So again, what he said can absolutely be found with a basis in fact, but the point is that it's Donald Trump saying it. And since the climate alarmism lobby is well set against him for a whole host of other ideological reasons, this in some ways does actually play into the renewable scam as he describes it. So one has to be very careful when considering any information that's put out by Donald Trump in particular, because he is such a divisive figure. And with that in mind, we'll just go now to what he said about the supposed basis, the scientific basis for the pursuit of renewable and indeed net zero in the first place, i.e. climate change.
And I hope the Prime Minister is listening, because I told it to him 3 days in a row. That's all he heard. North Sea oil, North Sea, because I want to see them do well. I want to stop seeing them ruining that beautiful Scottish and English countryside with windmills and massive solar panels that go 7 miles by 7 miles, taking away farmland. But we're not letting this happen in America. In 1982, the executive director of the United Nations Environmental Program predicted that by the year 2000, climate change would cause a global catastrophe. He said that it will be irreversible, as any nuclear holocaust would be. This is what they said at the United Nations. What happened? Here we are. Another UN official stated in 1989 that within a decade, entire nations could be wiped off the map by global warming. Not happening. You know, it used to be global cooling. If you look back years ago in the 1920s and the 1930s, they said, global cooling will kill the world. We have to do something. Then they said global warming will kill the world. But then it started getting cooler. So now they could just call it climate change, because that way they can't miss. It's climate change. Because if it goes higher or lower, whatever the hell happens, this climate change, it's the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world, in my opinion. Climate change, no matter what happens, you're involved in that.
Now, whether those are his actual thoughts or not is beside the point, but they do exactly what they're designed to do, which is to polarize and give people, exactly as he articulates, give people the feeling of helplessness because of this fundamental problem, either because you believe that the climate is boiling or whatever it's supposed to be doing, or you know that it's complete nonsense and you're seeing all the taxpayers' money go into destroying the landscape in the name of apparently protecting it. But with that in mind, we should consider an announcement, for example, by DEFRA, which has just gone out about the water consumption. And we see, a way to apparently reduce bills. But of course, actually, it doesn't deal with the possibility that one might take control of one's own water supply. And this is something I've talked about with regard to mosquitoes and how colonial administrations dealt with it. And from the erstwhile Public Health England, we go back to 2018 to look at their policy on mosquitoes in the garden, and indeed a specific bit about the storage of water and how that presents a hazard. And of course, in these days of biosecurity, it's very easy to see how that could be jacked up into something that creates much more fear. And just to draw this out and conclude it, I will just remind you that the Planning and Infrastructure Bill, which is going through Parliament at the moment, contains absolutely no provision whatsoever for the harvesting of water in the new development or development of housing, either individually or collectively, which means that there will be a constant push to surrender water for AI and data centers, but never ever to take control of it yourself.
Yeah, Charles, thank you very much for that. Now, Vanessa, Trump obviously was grabbing the headlines yesterday at the UNGA, but he wasn't the only thing that was going on there over the last couple of days. Jolani, in fact, was making an appearance. So what happened there?
Yes, well, apparently the first Syrian president to attend the UNGA in New York for almost 6 decades. The fact that he's an unelected president, he's formerly ISIS and Al-Qaeda, had a bounty of 10 million on his head. And according to the establishment narratives, his group was responsible for the Twin Towers. So quite extraordinary that he's seen arriving and receiving red carpet treatment. While, in fact, back in Syria, the massacres continue. The following video is of the current wildfires that have been raging for the last 3 days across Wadi Nasara, which is basically translated as the Valley of the Christians, which is an area to the south of Homs, beautiful area where historic churches and cultural edifices and infrastructure are now in danger of being destroyed. And of course, what we're hearing are reports from inside Syria that HTS themselves started the fires by dropping the thermal incendiary bombs by drones, just as they've done previously in Latakia, according to reports from people on the coast, of course, majority Alawites that have been ethnically cleansed since Jolani came to power. And here we have some pretty dreadful footage of Jolani arriving at the UNGA, the bustle of bodyguards around him, all of them looking extremely Takfiri-like to me. And he arrives with full pomp and ceremony, touching his hand to his heart as if he has one, while he enters the UNGA. He met with Marco Rubio, of course, Trump's point man in the Middle East, along with many others, of course. And one of the priorities of their discussion is the security agreement between Israel and Syria, that, of course, is one of the tasks that Jolani was given once he came to power by the US and the entire Zionist bloc. A special event, which I haven't had the stomach to watch yet, but I will do, was for the Middle East Institute to host Jolani, and none other than Charles Lister. Of course, Charles Lister, a member of the MEI, who invented the 70,000 moderate rebels, the narrative that was picked up at the time by David Cameron to excuse the funding of the terrorist groups in Syria to bring down the former Syrian government. And then, of course, he had a very friendly chat with ex-CIA Chief General Petraeus, who hails the former al-Qaeda leader for clear vision in Syria. I'm not quite sure how these people can utter such phrases when an ongoing massacre of the Syrian people is occurring from north to south under Jolani's unelected Takfiri regime. But let's have a reminder also of Petraeus's role himself in the downfall of Syria. Seymour Hersh, Petraeus established a rat line between Libya and Syria to send weapons to the Nusra Front, which of course is al-Qaeda, the group that was founded not only by Jolani, but also by Assad al-Shabani, who's the foreign minister, also at the UNGA, and other extremist groups seeking to topple the government of former Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. They mentioned Timber Sycamore, of course, which was a budget of over $1 billion per year given to around 500 moderate rebels, but ended up in the hands of ISIS by accident, of course. According to former French intelligence officer Thierry Meyssan, Petraeus continued to help fund al-Qaeda groups, including ISIS, after he was forced to resign from the CIA in 2012 after a sex scandal. I just want to show Petraeus's introduction to Jolani, which is kind of, we were talking this morning, Mike, about the fact that these figures like Ambassador Robert Ford, who was responsible for much of the creation of the death squads, the Free Syrian Army in Syria, who was kind of squealing in delight over meeting with Jolani over the last few years, both in Idlib and then in Damascus in 2025. And here we have Petraeus literally introducing him, but a reminder to people that rumors are that it was Petraeus himself who led the radicalization and the indoctrination of Jolani while he was in prison in Iraq. So an interesting introduction from Petraeus here.
Because the fact is that we were on different sides when I was commanding the surge in Iraq. You were, of course, detained by U.S. forces for some 5 years, including, again, when I was the 4-star there. And here you are now as the president of Syria.
I'm not going to show anything of what Jolani actually says because it's total MI6 Tony Blair speak. I mean, he says nothing different to the script that he's been given since December 2024. But in case people are worried, here Petraeus asks Jolani about his own personal mental health.
So this next one is about you personally. How are you holding up under all this pressure? Are you getting time to do some thinking? Are you getting enough sleep at night? Again, I've been there, and it is so very, very hard. And your many fans, and I am one of them, we do have worries.
I mean, this is just grotesque. This man was responsible for mass beheadings, executions, terrorist attacks in Iraq, even before he came to Syria, and now is responsible for the mass ethnic cleansing of minorities in Syria that are barely mentioned in the entire interview. And I don't know, I mean, I would love people's comments, but I just find this absolutely abhorrent that he's being fated to such a degree and that allegedly he's in among friends and allies. Well, what does that tell you about the US regimes, successive regimes that have supported the breakdown of Syria and the destruction of the people of Syria?
Charles, let's ask for your thoughts on that.
I think that engagement between Jolani and Petraeus has to be one of the most extraordinary things that I've seen in recent times. And it should cause anybody believing themselves to be on either side to call into question absolutely everything they thought they believed or stood for. It makes a total mockery of everything Petraeus has supposedly done in his career, or what he should have done it for. And exactly the same should be said of Jolani. I mean, it dispels any sense of doubt that this entire narrative and situation is driven by forces out of sight that we are apparently never told about. Absolutely extraordinary. The only thing I would add on UK column content is there's a very good interview on the website with Michael Yon, Ben Rubin interviewing Michael Yon. It's called Who Runs the Jungle? And Yon gives a very interesting anecdote about bumping into Petraeus, who he knows, at an airport. So please go and listen to that interview.
Thank you, Charles. Okay, let's move on. If you like what the UK column does, we do need your ongoing support. We want to say a massive thank you once again to everybody that is contributing. If you would like to help us out, there's a big blue button on the front page of the website that will take you to a page that will give you the various options. If you can't help us financially, that is fine, but please do help us by sharing our material, because we have to deal with the censorship regime. And that helps us a great deal. Another reminder that tickets are all sold out for the York event on the 18th of October. However, you can still follow along on the live stream. So if you haven't got a ticket for that, please consider it. And that's details are on the UK column shop. Now, Jerm is still in China. So tonight we're rerunning the interview that he did with Andrew Wakefield. So that starts at 7 p.m. And tomorrow, I'm going to be speaking to Vanessa at 1 p.m. Vanessa, very briefly, just tell us a little bit about this.
Well, I think it's just a very open discussion that we had, Mike, about the way that the sectarian divisions are going to be weaponized against Western populations, having historically been used, of course, to divide and conquer the countries, particularly of West Asia, or as it's known, the Middle East.
Yes, thank you for that. And so that will go out at 1 p.m. on the live stream tomorrow. So join us for that. I just want to remind everybody of the interview that went out yesterday at 1 p.m. With Andrea Klaric. So I was speaking to Andrea about engagement with people in Croatia on issues such as migration, digital ID, CDBC, censorship, attitudes to the war narrative. And we also discuss what appeared to be attempts to recreate tensions which led to the war with Serbia in the 1990s. So if you didn't see that yesterday, we've had some really good feedback on that. Please do join us for that, or get on the website and watch that. And Charles, then the Food and Health Festival.
Yes, this is being run in Edinburgh by Common Knowledge Edinburgh this Sunday, the 28th of September. I will be there speaking. Diane will also be there, and it will be a very wide-ranging day considering all factors pertaining to your control of food and health.
And Charles, just remind us of the 1,000 Words podcast just before we show the little trailer.
The 1,000 Word podcast is something that's coming to UK Column. We're absolutely delighted that it is. It involves Jake Fern, the portrait artist, interviewing whilst he paints the portrait of the subject. And he's had tremendous success with it to date. And it just gives a fascinating insight into somebody that a different interview technique doesn't quite capture. And it's a really, really interesting way of engaging with the subject, and indeed a phenomenal painting to look at the end.
1,000 Words is coming to UK Column. Watch Katie Jo Murphy, co-founder of Hope Sussex, sit for her portrait whilst deep diving into life, the universe and everything. First episode airs this weekend on UK Column.
And Charles, correct me if I'm wrong, that's 7 p.m. on Sunday?
Correct.
Thank you.
Absolutely it is.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Let's come back to the UN General Assembly. And, Yvette Cooper, our illustrious new Foreign Secretary, was speaking. Let's have a listen to what she said.
I stand before you today beneath the emblem of the United Nations to confirm the historic decision of the British government to recognise the State of Palestine. This step alongside friends and partners, reflects a long-standing truth that statehood is the inalienable right of the Palestinian people and that two states is the only path to security and lasting peace for Israelis and Palestinians alike. But recognition must be a spur, not a substitute for urgent action. A ceasefire now, the release of all hostages, the restoration of aid and a lasting framework for peace. Recognition is about the future, but it is rooted in our past. 75 years ago, Britain was rightly proud to recognise the State of Israel. But the promise of upholding Palestinian rights has gone unfulfilled. For decades, my country supported a two-state solution, but only recognised one state. That changes now, as we join more than 150 member states in recognising the state of Palestine and protecting the pathway to peace.
Now, I'm sure we can talk about this in extra and so on, but for me, that whole thing was complete nonsense. It changes nothing. The Starmer regime has not made any statement or taken any action to actually pressure Israel into stopping the genocide. They haven't prevented a single bullet from being shipped to Israel from this country. Now, also on Monday, Keir Starmer put out an X-post wishing the Jewish people, the Jewish community, a happy new year. This was the tweet that he pushed out. Well, this resulted in over 4,000 comments. Now, let's just have a look at a few of those. To go gaslight someone else, hypocrite, he was told, you don't get to bless us for the new year after embracing the Palestinian Authority that pays the salaries of Jews' murderers. And then he's more and more commentary on this. You're quite literally the second coming of Neville Chamberlain. Is in this new year, may the Lord strike you and your disgusting, inept and corrupt party and call strike down you and your disgusting, inept party and corrupt party and call a general election. Sorry. The strong language started coming out at that point. The insults against the Islamic community started coming out. From the river to the sea, but this time with the Israeli flag, really sort of suggesting the Greater Israel Project, and more unpleasantness in the form of artwork and so on appearing on here. So this was pretty unpleasant. So the question is, what did the recognition of Palestine achieve? In the meantime, then Armed Forces Minister Alistair Cairns has posted an opinion piece in the Daily Mail headlined, British veterans fought to bring peace and security to Northern Ireland. Now they deserve a fair deal. Now, this is about the return of the investigations into British military activity, British Army activity in Northern Ireland during the so-called Troubles. This entire process, of course, this investigation, the historical investigation, is a travesty because people on the Republican side were released from prison under the so-called Good Friday Agreement with letters of amnesty from Tony Blair, while people serving in the British Army have had to endure decades of inquiry, criminal investigation, and so on. Now, Cairns attempts to wrap this all up in words of reassurance for anyone that on the receiving end of it. But the question then is, what has been the response to this in the comments? This is typical of it. The courts wouldn't allow an asylum seeker to be deported to Kenya, but it's okay for soldiers because, of course, part of this is them having to go back to Belfast for hearings. Two-tier Keir, don't care about our heroes, he's a terrorist lover, and so on. So more of the same, in other words, two-tier Keir supporting terrorists, and etc. This is both of these situations, in my opinion, and Vanessa might critique what I'm saying here in a second, but this, in my opinion, is designed to stir up these kinds of sentiments. Everyone is supposed to feel outrage at it because Starmer knows that aside from a few memes on X with unpleasant words on them, none of the outrage is going to be directed at him personally or even at his government. When it comes to the crunch, it's going to be directed at people perceive to be on the left, because the left-right split is something which is absolutely being amplified at the moment, or else some people who have different colored skin. But if we go back to his X post that we saw earlier and look at this this comment, sorry. So the comments section isn't going as you hoped, said Arthur. Well, in fact, I believe it is going exactly as he hoped, because I believe that this was a pretty cynical attempt just to cause this kind of outrage. Now, 2 weeks ago, around 1 million people came out on Britain's streets, funded and promoted by largely the Zionist lobby. There was a counter demonstration, as Ben was pointing out on a previous news program, which also seems to have had Zionist interest behind it to a certain degree. Is it a surprise then that the same interests would be supporting both sides of an engineered argument? And the question is, has this ever happened before? This is an article on John Waters' Substack, headlined "How British Intelligence Planned the Irish Troubles of 68 to 98 and Used Provisional IRA Fake Patriots to Achieve the Ruination of Ireland." I think this is important because the ruination of England is exactly where this country is at the moment. And I would just ask the question, what would happen if, instead of coming out on the streets and waving some flags, that the 1 million people or so that were out a couple of weeks ago made a commitment instead to stop paying tax? Would the regime take notice then? Vanessa, this segment has been a bit of an opinion piece, but I'd just be interested in your thoughts on it.
Well, I mean, it's kind of interesting. I mean, Tom Barrack, who will get on to Trump's sort of envoy to the Middle East, described the whole operation of recognizing a Palestinian state as useless. Those were his words. And I was thinking it was to appease the anti-genocide protesters and so on after they've been victimizing Palestine Action and old age pensioners who are coming out to protest in support of Palestine Action, for example. But now I'm actually wondering, when you're showing those responses to Starmer, if it's not also giving oxygen to the Zionist victimhood, which is also something that they need to be able to reinforce their cause as they further expand their violence and their slaughter and their genocide, not only of Palestinians, but also Lebanese, Syrians, Iraqis, Yemenis, etc. So I think there's two roles, as you've rightly said, but I think on a local, national level, yeah, it's all about stirring up hatred, sectarian hatred again.
Charles, just before we come on to your main segment here, have you got anything to add to that?
Well, I would absolutely agree with what Vanessa says. I think listening to Yvette Cooper, first of all, sounded like she had taken elocution lessons before delivering that speech and was sort of searching for gravitas that she never quite found. But it's as though she's sort of saying that something was so clearly the case that the unanswered question is, well, so why is it taken until now? Why now? And also, like a curve which needs flattening, a pathway to peace remains incredibly sort of ill-defined. That, what is the end state, and indeed what are the obstacles along the way, and how much does it cost in human life and money to actually tread that apparent pathway to peace? So it's just the latest confection in a sort of barrage of nonsense, I would say.
Well, we were just talking about the 1 million people on the streets. Of course, migration being a key driver to encourage that activity. So what are your thoughts on that issue at the moment?
Well, I think specifically migration is only pushed out as a problem in order that a solution may be divined. And the latest in the sort of summer narrative, the latest chapter concerns the migrant arrested in Epping. And he has now just been convicted by Chelmsford Magistrates Court. And this is put up by the BBC, who say that Epping hotel asylum seeker jailed for sex assaults. Now, the point of the BBC article really is to continue to fan the flames of division, helplessness and confusion. And particularly they go a bundle on confirming the worst fears of people who do have concerns about this, in that the suggestion is that people who do come from other countries have different standards, and that is absolutely a well-founded concern, as though because he's Ethiopian, he didn't have any understanding of how things work here. In actual fact, of course, the age of consent in Ethiopia is 18, and he is reported as being a Christian. So further confusion here about, is this another sort of dig at Christianity, or a lot of language used deliberately to confuse and conflate. As to the trial itself, and indeed the ruling handed down, which has come from Chelmsford Magistrates Court, point to note, first of all, that these offences, which are now shown on screen, attempted sexual assault on a child aged 14, to incite or cause a child to engage in sexual activity, sexual assault on a female twice, 2 different people, and harassment without violence. Now, they're all what's called either way, tribal either way, which means they could have gone to Crown Court, but actually they were retained by the Magistrates Court, which means that there was a maximum of 12-month sentence. And a lot of people, therefore, have been provoked into outcry, saying, well, it's not nearly a strong enough sentence, should have been much greater, and all the rest of it. Now, I can understand exactly why those concerns would be there, but of course, by limiting it to the Magistrates Court, meaning that the sentence was only going to be that, and what one has to look at really are the sentencing guidelines from the Sentencing Council, and they're shown on screen now, and one has to determine the offence category, which of course is done by 2 different categories, looking at the harms and the culpability. And it's almost as though this story has been cherry-picked in order specifically to make it look like nothing has been done, because the threshold in every single circumstance is not quite met. Essex Police, of course, have reported on this as well, and they bring out the points that there's also a 5-year sexual harm prevention order being set against the man, Hadush Kibatu, and also that he'd be on the sexual offences register for 10 years. Now, the point being missed here, of course, is that because the UK Border Act 2007 has qualifying criteria for automatic deportation, the length of the sentence, and indeed any of the other things that Essex Police are mentioning, should be academic. And this is further reinforced by the announcement made by the government just last month concerning what they're calling immediate deportation. He is now to be regarded as a foreign criminal stipulated by the Border Act 2007, and indeed he has a sentence of at least 12 months. However, the Daily Mail reporting here, of course, that now there might be a counterclaim effectively engaging the European Convention on Human Rights in order that this is not going to lead to deportation. Again, something that seems to be deliberately put out in order to inflame tensions. And as a banner across the top of the Daily Mail piece, it's shown on screen now. It says, breaking news, foreign criminals are being given £2,000 when they leave the United Kingdom. So there are just so many elements of this particular story to suggest that the problem is, in effect, insurmountable. And then we cast our mind back to Operation Restoring Justice, which was something put on by Reform a short while ago, in which they proposed to have a plan for mass deportations. And part of that was to get out of the European Convention on Human Rights, and indeed to repeal the Human Rights Act 1988, which in effect would head off exactly the situation that the Mail is forecasting. So they're attempting to look strong, attempting to make the case for there being a political solution to this. Has become a key political background. But what's not to be forgotten is that this always leads to exactly the same place. And here we have Sarah Pochin, the Reform MP, talking about where that place is.
About what Chris Philp is now saying, the Shadow Home Secretary, on ID cards. What do you feel about ID cards, digital ID cards? Is that something that Reform UK would support?
Well, look, I personally don't have a problem with an ID card. You know, I don't see what the issue is. Most of our information now is on our smartphones anyway.
Can we trust the system, though?
Well, what more? How much more could we be at risk? As I say, all of our information is out there in a cloud, in the ether, whatever you want to call it.
So I can't sit here and say that that is absolutely reform policy, but what I can say is that, of course, as one of the few MPs at a time where Danny Kruger has just joined the party and said that they're preparing for government, and there is, of course, an enormous public swing towards reform, a political solution looks very likely to include a digital ID. And of course, I just remind you finally about BritCard, which is the solution proposed by the Labour Together think tank. And just to quote from that, this is exactly matching the problem. 1 million people live in the UK without permission to do so, undermining the sense of fair play. And this is how BritCard is how a mandatory, universal national identity credential can help Britain control illegal migration and secure its borders. Because, of course, we got the question of, well, what if Kibatu is deported back to Ethiopia? Well, lo and behold, we don't have an agreement with Ethiopia, so there's another stumbling block. But, of course, if we had a digital identity, then we'd know whether or not he was trying to come back or whether he was still in the system. So what's being done about this? Well, one thing just to point out is Big Brother Watch's campaign, which they're entitling Checkpoint Britain, and they've just had a survey conducted by YouGov, which was admittedly fairly small, only just over 2,000 respondents, all online, but overwhelmingly 63% of people absolutely rejecting wholesale the idea of digital ID. And finally, they point you to a petition that they've started, which has only attracted 100,000 signatures so far, but there'll be a link in the show notes for you to take a look at that.
Charles, thank you very much for that. Vanessa, let's come back to you and back to the Middle East. Now, you're obviously based in Lebanon, but how's the pressure building there? Because obviously Lebanon still has, effectively Syria to the north and Israel to the south.
Yeah, to the east and the north for
Yes.
Syria, of course, and Israel to the south. And Israel, in reality, has increased its number of occupation points in southern Lebanon to 7 rather than 5 previously. And it conducts daily, if not sort of morning, afternoon, evening attacks, either by drone or by airstrike on areas of southern Lebanon, but also the eastern and northeastern areas of Lebanon perceived by them to be Hezbollah strongholds. And on Sunday, I wanted to draw attention to this attack, which was a drone attack on civilians in Bint Jabal in the south. These are the children, Hadi and Celine Sharara, who were killed in the attack, including their father and their sister, and their mother and their other sister are hospitalized in critical condition. And a bystander, Mohammed Marouche, was also killed in the strike. This is the mother, Amani Bazi, here with the 2 children that were murdered by Israel on Sunday in the attack. And this is the mother at the funeral of the 2 children. She was brought actually in her hospital bed to bid farewell to the children that were slaughtered by Israel indiscriminately. And this is happening on a daily basis. But interestingly, there was an interview with Thomas Barrack, who I've said is Trump's basically his main man in the Middle East, trying to push through the normalization between Syria and Israel, and in Lebanon to dismantle and destroy the resistance against Israel. What was extraordinary for me about this interview, and that's why I've included a number of clips, is that he was incredibly frank and honest, whether he felt disarmed by the interviewer, who I think was extremely good. But let's just hear how he first of all describes himself.
And if you look at diplomacy, and all of them are much better than me, because I'm not really a diplomat, right? I'm like an event-driven mercenary to get things done for this president.
Well, I couldn't really say it better myself. I mean, he's an economic hitman. He has links to corruption in the first Trump administration, links to Epstein, and so on and so forth. So he's certainly not a trustworthy individual. But let's hear what he says about the end game in the region, Trump's end game in the region.
Through what exactly is the Trump doctrine in the Middle East?
So President Trump brilliantly said, look, I'm not going to lose any more American lives. We've been there. I'm not going to take over any more countries and try and teach them the colonial method. It never worked. So we'll worry about counterterrorism. We'll cooperate with our neighbors, and that's it. And that's basically what he's done. Israel, a different story. Israel is a valued ally We subsidize them $4 or $5 billion a year. It has a special place in America's heart. And we're living with the confusion of what's happening in this transition. So it's complicated. It's a really difficult zip code.
What's the end game?
I was hoping you weren't going to ask that because I don't know. I don't think anybody knows.
Of course, that's absolute nonsense. They know exactly what the end game is. And actually, he goes on to describe it. But what I find interesting in this particular response from him, he talks about the reason why the Zionist bloc policy has not been successful to basically bring Arab peoples under their control. So let's have a listen to this.
I don't think anybody knows. Look, the end game, when we say peace, it's an illusion. There's never been peace. There will probably never be peace because everybody's fighting for legitimacy. So people say, well, they're fighting over borders and boundaries. It's not what they're fighting over. A border or boundary is the currency of a negotiation. The end result is somebody wants dominance, which means somebody has to submit. In that part of the world, submit, there's no Arabic word for submit. They can't wrap their head around submit. So eventually, prosperity is the only answer.
So he's very clearly saying there that submission is not an option from the Arab resistance. And someone pointed out to me that the word Islam means submission to the word of God for Muslims. But of course, the Middle East is not only made up of Muslims, there's Christians, there's all manner of minorities and minority faiths in the Middle East, in Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq, and so on. But what for me is this arrogance that, damn it, the Arabs won't submit to doing what we want. But he then brings in the idea of prosperity, which is effectively, well, if we can't get them to submit through what we're doing, for example, in Palestine, then we'll incentivize them with prosperity, which is, of course, exactly what they've done with the Arab Gulf states. So then he goes on to talk about the role of Hezbollah. And again, this is very interesting. He actually admits that the American policy or the Israeli policy in Lebanon is effectively increasing the popularity of Hezbollah. So let's have a look at this.
So until Hezbollah, which is 70,000 troops, we don't recognize it. Hezbollah is a foreign terrorist organization in American parlance. I get in trouble every time we go into this discussion because in Lebanon it's not, right? In Lebanon it's a political party. It has 27 parliamentary seats out of 166 or so in parliament. But Hezbollah is an armed militia separate from the Lebanese armed forces, bigger than the Lebanese armed forces. Lebanese armed forces has been a stable influence.
And what incentive do they have to put their weapons down?
Zero. Zero. I mean, this is the problem, especially when Israel is attacking everybody. So if Israel is attacking Syria, Israel is attacking Lebanon, Israel is attacking Tunisia. As it goes on, their argument gets better and better, is we're here to protect the Lebanese from Israel.
Now, we'll talk more about this in extra, but what's very interesting there is that he appears to admit that Israel did conduct the attack against the Samud flotilla heading to Gaza in Tunisia. And the last two clips, first of all, he's talking about the Lebanese armed forces, which he calls LAF, L-A-F. So let's just see what he says about them.
So LAF being mostly Sunnis, there are Shias, and it's a good organization. It's well-meaning, but it's not well-equipped. Because who are they going to fight, right? We don't want to arm them. We're going to arm them so they can fight Israel? I don't think so. So you're arming them so they can fight their own people, the Hezbollah. Hezbollah is our enemy. Iran is our enemy. We need to cut the heads off of those snakes and chop the flow of funds. That's the only way you're going to stop Hezbollah.
So this is quite extraordinary. He's actually admitting that America is keeping the Lebanese armed forces at a level where they can't defend the country against Israel, but they can be used to turn against their own people, i.e. The resistance. And then the final comment not the final comment, I recommend everybody watches the whole interview, but this comment he makes about if you don't come into line in Lebanon, what he will do. So let's just play this.
And I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, because all they do is talk. There's never been one act. We told them, do you want our help? We'll give you our help. We gave them a playbook. They can't get there.
They can't execute.
No, absolutely not. So we say, fine, we're not going to execute. You know who's going to execute? Walk across that border. Do you see where Jerusalem is? Jerusalem is going to take care of the Hezbollah for you.
So, and that's what's happening right now.
Absolutely.
So that's very clear. Lebanon won't come into line with the US playbook. So now Israel is being triggered to carry out the US's or Washington's dirty work by attacking the resistance and the civilians in the south to bring Lebanon in line with the US playbook.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Vanessa. We will talk more about this in extra. Now, coming back to Europe then, in a sense, but unfortunately beginning with another picture of Trump. I just want to highlight this because the war hysteria continues to heat up this week, led, of course, by the mainstream media. This is Fox News here. Sorry, we'll go back one. President Donald Trump, they say, on Thursday said the US could end up in World War III over Russia's war in Ukraine and conceded that Russian President Vladimir Putin has let him down over his refusal to end his military campaign. And this is at the time that Trump is doubling down on the idea or the narrative that he was putting forward with Starmer at the press release, the press conference the other day. Fox follows this. You got a bit of a preview of it with an outright lie. They said that one day later, Russia sent 3 fighter jets over Estonia's capital city of Tallinn in a direct and clear violation of its airspace, prompting another NATO member to spark Article 4 for the second time in as many weeks. But the point here is the Russian MiGs were not sent over Tallinn, and even the map published by the Estonian Defence Forces show that they stayed over the Baltic Sea, not coming closer than, was that about 20 miles or so from the coast, even if the route was questionable. I mean, this is still being argued over. Associated Press then, in this article, claims that a senior Estonian military official alleges that the pilots of the MiGs ignored signals from Italian F-35 pilots who were sent to investigate the presence allegedly in Estonian airspace. And in fact, this article makes the point that it still needs to be confirmed if the border violation, the alleged border violation, was deliberate or not. And the commander of Estonia's military intelligence center is reported by AP here as saying that the Russian jets must have known they were in Estonian airspace. So the Russian pilots didn't pose a military threat, this article goes on to say. But although they said or acknowledged that communication from the Italian pilots flying the F-35s, the Russians, they say, ignored it and didn't actually follow the signs, which is, I'm not sure what signs they're talking about, which is partly why they were in Estonian airspace for so long. He said why they didn't do it, that's a question for the Russian pilots. So this hysteria continues to build. This, of course, began with the alleged drone attacks in Poland. And with all this hysteria over Estonia and Poland, the flight of a Russian IL-20 intelligence aircraft over the Baltic Sea yesterday may have gone unnoticed by the corporate media, but not quite, because 2 Swedish Gripen jets and 2 German Eurofighter jets were sent to go and escort this aircraft as well. So again, this is an Associated Press article that we can see on screen here. And they were just trying to hype this situation up once again. But the rhetoric from, if that's the media, the rhetoric from various MPs and other European leaders continues to ramp up as well. So let's have a look at that. Here is the Lithuanian defense minister. Russia is testing NATO again. Dozens of drones in Poland last week, drones in Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and now fighter jets in Estonian skies. These are deliberate provocations. They're deliberate tests of our readiness, our resolve, and of the limits of our deterrence. the latest in an escalating pattern of pressure by Russia. And she went on to say, for Estonia, for Poland, for Lithuania, for all of NATO's eastern flank, this is a direct threat, not just to territorial integrity, but to citizen safety. And of course, the idea of keeping your citizens safe is really the core narrative that we're hearing from MPs and other leaders right across Europe and the UK at the moment. And she went on to say here, our biggest risk currently is miscalculation by Russia. Does Russia believe that NATO will not allow violations of its territory? Does Russia believe that Europe is going to strike back together with the United States? That's now the last line of defense between if and when a war with Russia happens. And then we had comments from the German foreign policy advisor, Jürgen Hart. Only a clear message to Russia that any military border violation will be met with force. These provocations are tested by Russia. Again, reiterating basically exactly the same words, and will only end if we respond clearly to all military border violations. The alternative would be for Russian war logic to continue to escalate. Now it is airspace violations, so it would be the bombing of individual targets. Then Russian soldiers will come. It's the narrative is just incredible. And then Donald Trump yesterday was asked whether NATO countries should shoot down Russian aircraft if they violate NATO airspace. And he replied, yes, I do. And so just very quickly, Charles, thoughts?
Well, in the language of the Strategic Defence Review published this year, it looks like the defence dividend is going to pay out, because this is exactly what people have been itching for, the defence or war industry in particular, who stand to make absolutely billions from this and already are, because of the apparent requirement to mobilise and put 5% of GDP towards spending on war. So it's looking good for the reassurance force, who must be beginning to think about what they're going to pack and all that kind of thing. So this is exactly where it was always looking like it was going to go. I think the only difficulty for us, perhaps as sort of analysts and commentators, was to see exactly what steps were going to be taken in order that it delivered the conflict that's been so much desired.
Indeed. Okay, we will move on then. And of course, we've got Andrew Wakefield speaking at our event in a few weeks' time. But what's been going on in the United States over the question of what causes autism?
Yes, well, I'm not actually intending to deal very specifically with the issue at hand. It's rather more the tsunami of propaganda which has come out in the wake of this, and I'll go on to refer to exactly how that pertains to Andrew Wakefield and indeed another speaker at our York event. But I'm afraid to say it is Donald Trump again, but this is actually going to pertain to what's happened in the United Kingdom. Let's just listen to what he said.
And there are other parts of the world where they don't have Tylenol, where they don't have autism. That tells you a lot. And I want to say it right now. And, the way I look at it, don't take it. Don't take it. There's no downside in not taking it. So I'd like to ask Bobby to come up and say a few words. I hope I didn't ruin his day, but that's the way I feel. I've been very strong on the subject for a long time. Life is common sense, too. And there's a lot of common sense in this, and I wish things like this were brought up, and this group has worked so hard on it. But I'd like to be a little bit more, a little speedier in the process of a recommendation, because there's no harm in going quicker. There's absolutely no harm. At worst, there's no harm. Thank you very much. Bobby, please.
Now, of course, this has prompted a response from every single medical organisation in the world, apparently, saying that there is absolutely no evidence to support what Trump is saying here. We've got the World Health Organization issuing a statement on autism-related issues, something that's backed up by the Department of Health and Social Care, saying paracetamol in pregnancy, what you need to know. And they say there's no evidence that taking paracetamol during pregnancy causes autism in children. Now, that's either a straight lie or it's a manipulation regarding the specifics around the conditions that are actually referred to, because the Dean of the Faculty of Public Health at Harvard, Andrea Baccarelli, has cited 46 studies. It was his paper that has effectively inflamed this. Now, of course, one of the fundamental things that come out of this are that at no point has anybody suggested that taking painkillers in the first place might not necessarily be an appropriate thing to do when considering the state of the human body. And that is not medical advice, by the way. It's just a consideration. And the other thing, the coincidence, which absolutely cannot be ignored, considering this is relating to pregnancy, is the astonishing campaign that's just being started with autumn vaccination in mind in the United Kingdom. We'll just have a look at the video that they've put out now.
Morning.
If you're pregnant, you can help protect your baby from RSV, whooping cough, and flu, which can cause serious illness. Vaccines give you both the best protection against these diseases.
Vaccinated?
Yeah. During pregnancy and in your baby's first months of life. Stay strong, get vaccinated, speak to your midwife or GP practice.
Now, one of the very interesting points to note is that something that's been particularly hammered by the NHS is the idea that a pregnant woman getting vaccinated means that delivery of that vaccination through the placenta will benefit the newborn baby. And the idea, the campaign sort of tagline is stay strong, get vaccinated. Now, with that, we've got all sorts of associated imagery which infantilizes the entire situation. You'll note that there is no opportunity missed with regard to wrapping more than one agenda into this story. Of course, every single couple or parent and child shown is of some sort of ethnic minority, but then we are given the white mother with child to reinforce the point. So there we go, stay strong and get vaccinated. The other thing to point out is that the wording used is vaccines help protect what matters most, not forgetting that what matters most are the profits of the pharmaceutical companies and indeed the benefit to the people that invest in them. That's the key takeaway from this, hence the propaganda, hence the backlash against what Donald Trump was saying in the first place. And yes, I should just finish off by saying that please do join us on the live stream for our event in York, because not only do we have Andrew Wakefield speaking, going over some of the points in his career which relate to this very topic, but also Liz Evans, who will be specialising on medical ethics. And that brings my report on propaganda to a close.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. It also brings the news program to a close because we are out of time for now. So thank you very much to Charles and Vanessa for joining me. Thank you all for watching. We'll be back in a couple of minutes on the live stream if you're a UK Column member for some UK Column News Extra. And if you're not a member, then we would appreciate it. Consider joining us and joining us for the extra program as well. So we'll see you in a few minutes if you're a member. Otherwise, don't forget Germ tonight at 7, interview tomorrow with Vanessa at 1 p.m. and we'll be back for another news program at 1 p.m. on Friday. See you then. Bye-bye.